The EOS C80 is a new cinema camera, just released by Canon, which packs a lot of functionality into a compact and portable form factor. It follows on from the C70, which was already a very capable cinema camera, but adds some significant improvements. It now has wired Ethernet, built-in Wi-Fi, an SDI video out, and most of all a new full-frame 6K sensor, the same sensor as in the recently released C400. I bought the C80 with my own money and I've been using it for a couple of months now. So in this review I'm going to take a look at the camera and try to show you what it's all about. If you're thinking about making a major purchase like this camera, then I think it makes sense to get as many different viewpoints on it as you can. So I'm not going to tell you that this review is going to be all you need to know or anything like that. I'm just going to give you my take on the camera, and being a real techie gearhead, that's going to be concentrating on things like bit rates and codecs and stuff like that. I'm sure other people will be reviewing the camera from a more creative point of view. Also, my thing is hiking up mountains and shooting landscapes, so I'm going to be using the C80 pretty well stripped down. Again, I'm sure there will be plenty of people showing you how you can rig up the camera in all kinds of fancy ways. But for me at least, one of the big features of the camera is that you can basically pull it out of a backpack and shoot without rigging anything. I'm not connected with Canon in any way. I bought the camera myself at full retail price, so this review is purely going to be my own thoughts. But hopefully this video will help you to get an overall picture of the C80. By the way, I'm using the camera with firmware version 1.0.1.1, so things may change by the time you see this. In the past, Canon have been very good about supporting their products with firmware enhancements after release, and I'm certainly looking forward to that with the C80. Anyway, let's get going and take a look at the C80. I'll start by going over my general impressions of the camera. The C80 is a lot bigger than a mirrorless camera, of course, but for a cinema camera, it's really amazingly compact and lightweight for what it does. You can easily hold it in one hand, although I might operate it with two, and you could rig it onto a larger gimbal. The build quality is excellent, it feels solid throughout, and the controls are really firm and well placed. The C80 packs a lot of punch into a very small form factor. You can carry this around in a pretty small pack with a selection of lenses. I have two pretty hefty lenses here, and all the ancillaries you need, and shoot without rigging anything, and still have space for a jacket and a sandwich. It's true that this setup is pretty stripped down, although I also have a monitor in here if I feel like rigging it up. But the point is that even with nothing added to the camera, other than a lens, I can pull it out of my bag, press record and shoot. If you're used to the C70, then the C80 is going to feel very natural, as it very much follows in the same pattern. However, there are still a surprising number of differences. The big one, of course, is the sensor, full frame, 6K, and a modern backside-illuminated design. In fact, the same sensor as in the C400, with triple base ISOs. Autofocus is also significantly improved. It's a little taller and heavier than the C70. The bottom mounting points are improved with a new forward screw socket. There are fit and finish improvements, the joystick is nicer, and the display hinge has been improved. The monitor is also a fair bit brighter and has a nice detent to hold it closed. There is one minor regression. The C70 has two built-in mics for stereo audio, and the C80 only has one, so it's mono. But you wouldn't be using the built-in mic for production audio anyway, and the built-in mic on the C80 is fine for scratch audio. In fact, I'm talking to you on it right now. Connectivity in the C80 is much improved with 12G SDI, built-in Wi-Fi, wired Ethernet, and the new multi-function shoe. The top handle has a separate mounting position, separate from the accessory shoe, and there's a new top handle. Finally, the C70 had no built-in level gauge, and you can see my elegant aftermarket solution here. The C80, though, does have a built-in electronic level, with settable sensitivity. The C80 really is a true cinema camera with all the right features, like built-in ND filters, lots of connectivity options, lots of external buttons, all programmable, and great colour and image quality. Let's take a more detailed look at some of these features. There are copious buttons on the camera, all of which can be configured, and 3 control dials and a joystick, and 2 of the control dials and the lens control ring can be configured to perform various different functions. The C70 was criticised for its tripod mount, which was just 3 screw sockets in a side-by-side line. Well, the C80 now has a front socket as well, making it much easier to mount on something like a Manfrotto plate. The top of the camera has a place to mount the handle, which is separate from the accessory shoe. This makes sense in some ways, as you can have the handle and an accessory connected, but it means that the handle has no electronic connection to the camera, so there are no controls on it, and the shoe on the handle is just a cold shoe. Also, the handle extends backwards over the accessory shoe and could conflict with some accessories, but there is a multi-function shoe extender cable that you could use to mount accessories in an alternative position. And that's basically it for mounting positions on the camera, except for a 1/4-20 on the right hand side that you can use to mount the camera vertical. Of course, there are loads of accessory cages you can get if you want more mounting options. The C80 runs Canon's Cinema operating system. This is very much the same as Canon's other cinema cameras, with just the differences you'd expect from the C80. The Cinema OS gives you good control over the features you need for cinema shooting, with all of the aids like peaking, zebras, false colour, waveform, vector scope, aspect ratio markers, and so on. The boot time is great. From powering on to actually recording is under 4 seconds. So if you want the battery to last even longer, you can save power by turning off when you're not actually shooting. The camera can be powered from BPA type batteries, which I'll cover more in a bit, or from the AC power adapter, which plugs into the rear of the camera. This is the same power brick that you use to run the charger. Heat is no problem at all as far as I can see. The camera has a fan, but in auto mode the fan stays off while shooting unless the camera gets hot. But in my 3-hour battery tests, the fan didn't even come on at all. The camera provides 3 ways to monitor your video: the built-in LCD screen, the full-size HDMI, and the 12G SDI. The built-in monitor is small, but it's quite bright for outdoor use, and of course you can add an external monitor easily enough. You can configure which screen overlays and aids go to which output in a very flexible way, and there's also a view assist which de-logs your footage when shooting log, which you can turn on and off for each of the 3 outputs individually. So you should easily be able to tailor your operator's on-screen aids, plus 1 or 2 other feeds using the HDMI and SDI for anyone else. Of course, the HDMI and SDI can be set to be totally clean. One bug I've found is that if you're shooting log, View Assist doesn't work in playback or preview mode on any of the outputs, the LCD, HDMI or SDI. For HDMI and SDI you might have a monitor which can add a LUT, but previewing on the LCD without View Assist is quite a pain. Hopefully they can fix this with a firmware update. Like other Canon cinema cameras, the C80 has a digital teleconverter function built in. I've never paid much attention to this because it basically just enlarges your pixels, which you can do just as easily in post. However, this time I thought I'd give it a try out and see how it performs. So here's an image shot with a zoom lens at 35mm and then doubled in post, using Resolve's zoom function. Here's the same shot but with the camera's teleconverter at 2x, and finally the same shot with the lens at 70mm. Based on these, it looks to me like the teleconverter actually does pretty well, better than zooming in post. The 70mm lens is the best, of course, so using the right lens will always be the best answer. But if you don't have that lens and you want to get the shot anyway, then the teleconverter could be worth checking out. The big attraction that the C80 has for me is its ready-to-go design. It's basically ready to go out of the box. But of course you do need to add a lens and a memory card, and even though the camera comes with a battery, you will probably want to think about that too. And the design of the camera affects all of these things, and they in turn affect the cost of owning the camera. So let's take a look at them. When it comes to lenses, the C80 is a real winner. The RF lens mount is a mirrorless short flange lens mount, and so will accept a lot of lenses very easily. You will generally want full frame lenses, but there are a terrific number of Cine lenses that will work with this camera, either through an adapter or directly, in all shapes and sizes. And of course you can use the whole range of RF mount photography lenses, as you'll see me doing here. If you want to shoot with anamorphic lenses, you should be fine, and the camera provides anamorphic D-squeeze for monitoring your shoot, which can be turned on and off individually on the built-in screen, the HDMI and the SDI, with D-squeeze ratios of 1.3x, 1.8x and 2x. It's a bit strange that there's no option for a 1.5x D-squeeze given how many 1.5x lenses there are on the market. However, Canon has already released this as a firmware update for the C400. I don't know if this can be done on the C80, but it seems at least there's hope. The C80 uses Canon's BP series batteries, which is good news, though it must be said they aren't the cheapest things around. But there are third-party options available which can be good value. So I ran some tests on the new BP A30N that came with the camera, along with my old BP A30 that I've been using for over 3 years on the C70. I also tested 2 third-party batteries, one new and one also 3 years old. I recorded in XFHEVC S4K with the LCD screen turned on at standard brightness, shooting the TV so there would be some motion to process. And here are the results. Based on these, it seems to me like the newer N series isn't essential for the C80. Older BP A30 batteries work fine, but there does seem to be a slight edge for the N series. Kudos to both Canon and Hanol for their old batteries still going strong after 3.5 years of use. I'm not a heavy user like day to day, but still this looks pretty good. And overall the runtimes are great, with close to 3 hours of continuous recording on one small battery. And if this isn't enough, you could use the A60 batteries, which should give you over twice the runtime. Of course, if you're running with a fully rigged up camera with lots of accessories, then an external power solution may still be what you need. But if you're running more stripped down, like me, then clearly the C80 performs well. For storage, the C80 has 2 SD card slots. This seems like a bit of a handicap for 2 reasons. The highest speed rating for SD cards is V90, or 90 megabytes per second, which is 720 megabits per second, and this limits what the camera can record. But is there anything wrong with the video coming off the C80? For my money, and for what this camera is, I would say no. So really, to me, this is more of a numbers game than a real issue. But the other drawback is price. To access the fastest speeds of the C80, you will need V90 cards, which seem to be costing about £1,000 per terabyte right now. This seems completely out of whack, but I can't really blame Canon for this. The SD card prices just seem crazy. Still, if you're buying the C80 to use the fastest bit rates, this is definitely something to consider. The C70 already had pretty good connectivity, but the C80 rounds that out with some great new additions. The C80 is well set for audio. It has 2 mini XLR inputs with all the usual controls, as well as a stereo 3.5mm jack and a headphone jack, and of course the built-in mic. The camera has a USB-C port which can provide video or connect to the optional GPS. It doesn't take power though, so there's no charging or running off of USB power, which is not really an issue as the camera has a proper power port. The SDI output is 12G SDI. I don't have anything to test this with as my monitor is 3G, but it seems to work fine. And of course there's a full-sized HDMI port. There's a BNC timecode port which can be set up as either an input or an output. And the C80 has Canon's new multifunction shoe for attaching accessories to the camera. This is a pretty new system from Canon and I'm not really clear yet on what exactly is going to attach there, so I guess we'll see how this works out. The C80 has a Wi-Fi chip built in, which is a big improvement over the C70, and of course it also has a wired Ethernet port. Both of these provide network connections, and so they have a lot of features in common, although there are also differences. Both Wi-Fi and Ethernet can be used for FTP file transfer, internet streaming, and remote control using browser remote or an XC protocol connection. In addition, the Wi-Fi can be used to connect Canon's Content Transfer Professional app, and the wired Ethernet port can be used to transmit camera metadata using the CV protocol. The C80 has you pretty well covered when it comes to remote control, as there are quite a few options available. In fact, I haven't been able to test them all, but here's a quick rundown of what's available. The camera has a remote control jack on the side, and there are a couple of different ways you can use it. First of all, there is the Canon RC-V100 remote controller. This looks like a very sophisticated beast, although no display for a live view. I don't have one myself though, and given the price tag is £2,780, I'm not likely to be tempted. The other way is to use a commercially available controller. I tried a couple of these, but unfortunately I had no luck getting either of them to work. Canon have a multi-camera control app, which, as the name implies, can be used to control multiple cameras at once, including most of their recent cinema cameras. It's free and gives you loads of controls, including live views of all the cameras. Unfortunately though, it only runs on iPhone, and I don't have an iPhone, so I can't try it. You can also control the camera using Canon's XC protocol. This looks very cool and should allow you to use the C80 in conjunction with PCZ cameras. Again, though, I don't have the equipment to try this out. Fortunately, though, there is another option, which is Canon's Browser Remote app. This is Canon's standard remote control app for their cinema cameras, as opposed to the Camera Connect app, which works with their stills cameras. Since it's a web app, there's nothing to install on your phone. In fact, you don't even need a phone, just a PC or a tablet or whatever with a reasonably decent web browser. I tried it out on various web browsers and it seems to work fine. You can even control multiple cameras using different browser tabs. Once you're running, you can turn on a live view to see what the camera is seeing. There are numerous controls, but which ones you get depend on your device's screen. A larger screen, like a tablet, gives you more controls at one time. But you can control a lot of the camera's features like memory card selection, focus, subject detection and tracking, ND filters, iris, ISO, shutter and white balance. One negative point is that there's no LUT on Browser Remote, so if you shoot log, you're only going to see the flat log video. But all in all, it looks like Browser Remote is a really useful option for controlling your C80. The C80 supports a pretty complex set of frame rates and codecs, but actually if you work your way through the menus, it's not too hard to get set up. So working your way down the menus, here's how you can select the mode you want. First, you pick your sensor mode, which is either full frame or Super 35 crop mode. Next is system frequency, 59.94 for NTSC, 50.00 for PAL, and 24.00. Changing the system frequency basically reboots the camera, but that only takes a few seconds and you won't be doing this very often. Then pick your main rec format, which is basically what codec you want. For RAW you have the ST and LT variants. ST is less compressed, about 6.4 to 1, whereas LT is about 10 to 1. RAW ST is only present in the Super 35 crop mode. In the compressed modes, choose between H.264 AVC encoding, with either all intra or long GOP, or H.265 HEVC, which is GOP only. Once you've set those, then choose your resolution, which in turn controls your bitrate. Then choose your frame rate. All the modes go up to 59.94 frames per second except RAW. RAW LT in Super 35 crop mode is the only way to get RAW up to 59.94. One nice feature though is that all these files, including the MP4s, have smart file names containing the camera ID, card number, clip number, date and time and more, so you never need to worry about duplicate file names. The C80's bitrates are quite hard to figure out because there are a crazy number of possibilities, particularly in slow and fast modes. So here I'm going to present some of the most important bitrates on the C80, just so that you can get an idea of how the camera performs. I'm going to focus on RAW recording and compressed 4K in 10-bit 422. Let's start with normal recording mode. I'll get to the slow and fast modes in a bit. The tables here are monsters, but you'll find copies in the cheat sheet for this episode. First, here are the bitrates for all of the RAW recording modes. Note that the bitrates depend on whether you're in full frame or Super 35 crop mode. And here are the bitrates for all the compressed modes at 422 10-bit at 4K resolutions. These bitrates do not depend on your crop mode. For each codec, I've shown the bitrate in megabits per second, which is how the rates are usually discussed, megabytes per second, which is how memory cards are rated, and gigabytes per hour, which shows how fast you'll use up storage. And the last column shows what SD card you need to use for each mode. The slow and fast mode lets you set your target frame rate as per normal, like 24 frames per second for example, but then set the camera to record at a higher frame rate, so that when you play your footage back at the target frame rate, it's slowed down. The camera's menus display the playback bitrate for whatever slow and fast mode you're in. The record bitrate is that bitrate multiplied by the slowdown factor. This is the amount of data physically written to the card while recording. So this is the bitrate that tells you which kind of card you're going to need. So let's look at a representative sample of some of these, starting with the options available in full frame mode. As you can see, RAW only goes up to 30 frames per second, which isn't much use, and 4K Intra is limited to 60 frames per second, which you can get without using slow and fast. So you're generally going to be filming in long GOP mode, which lets you shoot up to 120 frames per second. If you switch the camera to Super 35 mode, a lot of the options stay the same, but the RAW and 2K GOP modes change a bit. Now you can shoot RAW up to 60 frames per second, but only with the same playback speed. Still, you could slow it down in post. Finally, you can get audio as a separate WAV file in slow and fast mode by switching to S&F clip / audio WAV mode. However, the frame rate in this mode is limited to 60 frames per second, which you can get in regular shooting mode, so there doesn't seem to be much point. Of course, the main thing about any camera is the pictures it takes. So, how good is the C80? I don't have any clever facilities for comprehensive testing, so I set up some simple tests for 3 areas I am interested in: resolution, noise, and low light performance. So let's see how it performed. It's important not to get too hung up on resolution in filmmaking, because resolution really isn't the one thing that makes a good picture. Some of the most renowned digital cameras in cinema history have had pretty mediocre resolutions if you just go by the numbers. So resolution isn't everything. But it is a thing, and since a selling point of the C80 is its 6K sensor, it's worth taking a look at how good it is. My resolution test setup isn't very sophisticated, and in particular the numbers I'm coming up with don't mean a lot in absolute terms, and there's a lot of subjective judgment here. So take these results with a pinch of salt, but they might be good for comparison. So the C80 in full frame mode scores pretty well, 20 in RAW and 14.5 in compressed modes. Compared to the C70 with 15 in RAW and 13.5 cooked, that's a pretty decent step up. The R5C slightly outperforms the C80 in AVC and does much better in RAW, but with an 8K sensor that's not a great surprise. In Super 35 mode, the C80 holds up well, with 15 in RAW and 13.5 in AVC, comparable to the C70, which of course has a Super 35 4K sensor. There is some slight deterioration at the higher frame rates, but not much. Even at 120 frames per second, the C80 still scores okay. This is pretty impressive. A lot of cameras will fall back on a simpler downscaling mode at higher speeds, and the picture quality falls apart because there's just too much data to handle. But the C80 holds up pretty well. I did some tests out in the field which show much the same results. Comparing the C80, C70 and R5C in RAW LT mode, the C70 comes out worst, while the C80 holds up pretty well even against the R5C. It's pretty much the same story in AVC Intra and HEVC long GOP. Comparing the 3 modes of the C80, I'd say they're pretty close, I guess because the AVC and HEVC modes are oversampled from the 6K photosight sensor, so the resolution of the camera really is about 4K pixels. Overall, I'd say the C80 gives us a decent boost in resolution compared to the C70, which is what I'd hope for. One thing that has occasionally bothered me about the C70 is noise in the image, even when shooting in broad daylight, although usually when I've been pushing the image a bit. Not very often, but enough to be a bit of a pain. So I wanted to see how the C80 compares. So I had a go at testing this with the C70 and C80 side by side for comparison. This is shooting at about right angles to the sun, 2 stops underexposed, and both cameras set to the same exposure. Overlaying text on the image makes the noise more apparent. As you can see here, both cameras have noise, remembering that this is pushing the image a bit, but it seems to me that the C80 has noticeably less than the C70. Modern digital cameras can perform very well in low light, and previous Canon cinema cameras have been very good here. So I decided to give the C80 a try out and see how well it holds up. The C80 has 3 base ISOs, which depend on what gamma curve you're shooting with, as shown in this table. You can set the base ISO to auto and it will pick the highest base that's not higher than your current ISO setting. The actual ISO setting goes up to 102,400 if you use the extended ISO mode. I shot a few tests of colour chips at various ISO settings by the light of one candle 50 cm from the card. These clips are all shot in the standard picture profile 2, which is Canon Log 2, with the default noise reduction in camera and no noise reduction in post. It's easier to see what's going on with a big shot of added gain. With this boost you can see noise in basically all the tests, but bear in mind this is stretched quite a lot. Really the camera performs well up to ISO 12800, then begins to deteriorate, with ISO 102,400 of course being the worst. The higher base ISOs really do provide a significant reduction in noise. ISO 3200 is noticeably cleaner in base 3200, and likewise 12,800 in base 12,800. Shooting colour chips and boosting the gain is really artificial. The real test is a live subject. So here's something close. Really, I think that if you're shooting live action by candlelight, even at f5, you're pretty well covered here. And even at ISO 102,400, the image cleans up pretty well with post-noise reduction. This is just using Resolve Studio's built-in noise reducer. The C80 of course isn't a stills camera, but it can shoot stills if you want some basic JPEGs for production reference or social posts, that kind of thing. The manual does cover this very briefly, but the information is all there. Basically, assign a button to photo and then make sure that you have an SD card inserted in slot B, because that's where the stills will be stored regardless of your slot selection. Also, you can't be recording or have pre-recording or slow and fast or browser remote active. But anyway, once you get past all that, it's easy. The camera takes plain JPEG images only in around 4K resolution, and it uses whatever exposure and mode you're shooting with. If you're shooting movies in log, then you will need to apply a LUT in Photoshop or the GIMP or even your video editor. You can preview your stills in the camera, just like you would preview your movies, but you need to make sure that you have the right card slot and the right media type selected. Some people might be inclined to say that the C80 is the camera that the C70 should have been, but I don't think that's really fair. I think the C70 was all the camera that it realistically could have been at launch, and it's still a great cinema camera that shoots great pictures. But still, the C80 really represents 4 years of additional development. It's well rounded out with new features, and the new sensor really looks like a step up. There are some issues. The lack of view assist on playback is the biggest one for me, and I hope they can fix that with a firmware update. So is it worth it? Well, I think if you're looking for a new cinema camera in this price bracket from scratch, I would certainly say yes. It's a great cinema camera, and I really think it represents good value for money. But if you already have a camera, then I think it's more a case of whether the C80 solves a problem that you have. For me, I want the videos I shoot to be as transparent as possible. I want them to be like a window on the world. And for that, the boost in resolution looks like a nice improvement. Also, it looks like noise might be less of an issue as well. How much these things matter to you, only you can judge. Overall, the C80 looks fantastic, and I really look forward to getting out and shooting with it more, especially once the weather improves. In any case, I hope this video has helped you to understand what the C80 is, and thanks for watching.